So as we just saw, OLS suggests incorrectly that there is a causal effect of education on the wage. Yeah, so just to be sure, this is a suggestion by OLS. OLS itself is not doing anything wrong. OLS actually correctly reports there's a correlation between education and wage. The problem is that we then tend to interpret this correlation as a causal effect. So to sort of stop us from getting this incorrect impression that the OLS gives, we can use instrumental variables. So let's see what that gives us. So we're going to specify a new model. So we're going to use yep, okay. From formula. Yeah, so again, don't worry about the syntax of stats models. That's not the purpose of what we're doing here. So now we're going to run the regression of the wage again on a constant. So here we specify the constant. Plus, now we're not going to run the regression of W on E, but on E as it is instrumented by Q. Yeah, so remember Q is our exogenous variation based on the time of the year that you were born, the month and the year that you were born, because that affects how many months you will go to school. So that's an exogenous variation. In particular, it's not affected by your motivation. So we're going to use this exogenous variation to instrument the education that you took, and that instrumented version of E is then put in the regression. So that's basically a two-stage instrumental variable estimation. So we can define the result of the IV as when we fit the model fit, and let's print IV res to see what happens here. Yeah, so when we run this regression, and now we're going to look at the effect of the instrumented education on the wage rate, you can see that the parameter is pretty close to 0, and in fact it's not at all significant. Yeah, so the t statistic is way below 1. So the IV estimation, where we looked at the exogenous variation in education, not the variation in education itself, but only the exogenous variation in education, when we regress that on the wage rate, we correctly see that there is no causal effect of education on the wage rate. Yeah, so IV correctly identified the parameter that we put in ourselves, that there is no effect of education on the wage rate. Yeah, so just to get an idea of how our instrument worked, we can actually look at IV result, and then we're interested in what happened in the first stage. And basically what you can see here, so here we have the coefficient on Q, and that coefficient is highly significant, so this is the t statistic, and it's around 2. Yeah, and the value 2 is of course exactly the value beta QE that we introduced into the model when we said how Q was affecting the number of years that you took education E. Yeah, so here in this first stage of the IV regression, we see that the parameter beta QE, which we set equal to 2, is correctly identified.